All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Irrational Confidence Podcast. We're talking college football, and it's springtime. It's slow. All of the spring games are over. But the man whose hope springs eternal, my co-host, Fresh, how you doing, buddy?
Haps, we are 119, 120 days from Georgia's national championship and 115 days and 110 somewhere on there to week 0. So we're actually closer to college football than we are from the previous season. We've crossed that threshold and ready to go.
So what we're doing, we're going to do a college six-pack because, as you guys know, most times when you're a college student, you can't afford the whole case. So we're only grabbing that six-pack, and we're going to go through 6 different questions that we have going through in and out of spring football and moving towards the season before we start breaking down that top 25 and kind of previewing what this college football season is going to look like. We got to start, though, fresh. I think that we have to start where there's big news. I mean, something happened in California, I think, and maybe made headlines. But I think we got to, first question is, what is Lincoln Riley going to do out there in Southern Cal?
Well, I mean, USC went out there and they paid a lot of money for Lincoln Riley, and with you look at the roster they had, USC should recruit itself. But I think the expectations now were elevated because the dude bought 2 houses in LA. That's how much he got paid. Day one, he was basically at the Super Bowl. He's been all around, been running around like a celebrity. He brought 3 superstars from Oklahoma with him. He brought his defensive coordinator. He has brought in 15 transfers to this point, and I got a feeling he's going to bring in a lot more. He's going to completely just gut the entire team, build up his own team in his own image, his own likeness, pun intended. And if he doesn't win the Pac-12 title this first year, it's actually going to be a disappointment. That's how high expectations are. You look at the players he's brought in. Caleb Williams was the quarterback he went to at Oklahoma after Spencer Rattler kind of struggled, got him going. Williams transfers him out there. Amari Williams, the wide receiver, comes with him. Cornerback Latrell McCutcheon comes with him. Then you go out, and they even go after players from the Pac-12 themselves. They go get Travis Dye from Oregon, linebacker Eric Gentry from Arizona State, running back Austin Jones from Stanford, cornerback Mekhi Blackman, and wide receiver Brendan Rice from Colorado, and Tyrell Bynum from Washington. All these guys are from their own conference they're playing in, and they're all coming to the Coliseum. You have UCLA starting to cause a little ruckus there this past year. I think that really set the alarm for USC is that they've got to get going. Um, I know the expectations are high, but it kind of makes me worry though, because when you look at Lincoln Riley's run at Oklahoma and what they're actually paying for, yeah, he had 2 Heisman Trophy winning quarterbacks. They went to the playoff twice. They got beat both times they were in the playoff. They played in a league very similar to the Pac-12, I think, top to bottom, where the dominant teams weren't necessarily dominant. And every week, you never knew what team was going to actually play the potential. It was very bipolar. You look at like the Big 12, Iowa State for 2 years. They shouldn't be a dominating team, but they were playing well, and Oklahoma couldn't compete with them, and they lost one time. You let Baylor become resurgent. You and Texas, the 2 big names, have struggled. Your defenses have been horrible, and now you're coming to USC and you're bringing your own defensive coordinator with you into a league which Utah is going to play great defense. Stanford somehow has a routine of beating USC every 3 or 4 years. UCLA has gotten better. Washington State have had times, and Oregon's been on the map for a long period of time. It's more of the glitz and glamour. I don't really know if Lincoln Riley's actually shown that he can truly win. And him running to USC without really having a trophy other than a Big 12 title has me just like it was a desperation move for both. It was kind of like you brought it in the past, like you're going to a dance or going to something like that where I don't have a date to prom. I see Lincoln Riley hanging over there. I'm like, I'm USC. I think that I'm attractive. He kind of looks a little attractive. I'm gonna go grab it and bring Lincoln Riley USC. And now you're kind of like, well, what am I actually doing? Or what have I actually? I'm not actually not that good looking. It's a weird kind of setup, and the expectations are so high that I only can see this failing because the money they're paying him, you have to go to the college football playoff every year, and you have to start winning national championships at USC. And this whole match made wherever for this situation, I think it was desperation. He knew Oklahoma was going to struggle. They were losing players, going to the SEC. He has to run. USC was grasping for the first coach to come their way. They basically paired each other up. It's going to be bad.
USC hit a home run to me in this place, like with this coaching hire, because they can't lose in this situation really. Like they threw a bunch of money at Lincoln Riley, and is he going to produce over there in the Pac-12? Absolutely, because we've talked about this before, especially last season, especially with how, I don't want to use the word weak the Pac-12 is, but it is a weaker conference. But there are some teams that we really liked out there in the Pac-12 after dark, as we always called it. Utah is going to be a good football team. Oregon's going to be a good football team. DTR coming back at UCLA, going to be a good football team. That's about it. That's about it. It's going to be a very top-heavy conference. It's going to be between those four teams. I think the biggest thing, if Lincoln Riley would have went out to USC and would have just sat there with that roster that he would have inherited, I think he would have struggled mightily. The key factor is Caleb Williams. Caleb Williams transferring from Oklahoma to USC is a huge win for the Trojans. Take a look at what Caleb Williams did this past year. You remember Caleb Williams, I think he come in like the third game of the season, fourth game of the season.
He came in the Red River rivalry.
So let's say it's game 4. Dude winds up with 1,900 yards, 21 touchdowns, only 4 interceptions, runs for another 440 yards, and 6 touchdowns there as well. I think when you put a playmaker like Caleb Williams on that USC team, and then Dye is a fairly decent running back coming in from Oregon that you mentioned, I think the real question for USC is, are you going to be able to replace Drake London? You had a great wide receiver there on the outside. Even as bad as USC was last year, Drake London had over 1,000 yards. Caleb Williams is going to be a difference maker. If they can protect him, which they have recruited at a half-decent level over there at USC, it's going to be interesting. Then I take a look at USC's schedule. I'm sitting there going into that UCLA game before I'm ready for it. You start off the year fairly easy. You're going to start with a warm-up game against Rice. Then you're going to go to Stanford, which, if Lincoln Riley is worth his salt, he's not going to underestimate the Cardinal. Then you have Fresno State coming to town. You have to travel up to Oregon State, but that's still early in September. It's not as tough as a game. And then you have Arizona State. You have Washington State. And then you're going into right before your bye on October 15th, you play Utah in Salt Lake. There's the first game. There's the first test. If Lincoln Riley does not have USC at 6-0 going into that game, he's a major disappointment. That Utah game is going to be the first big test for them. I'm going to call it, that's where game day is going to be. That's where, or Fox Big Noon Kickoff is going to be.
Yep.
You're definitely going to have one of the marquee TV places at that game. Then you go into your bye, and that's when it gets even easier. You go to Arizona, which might be the worst team in all of college football. You have Cal coming to town, Colorado, and then you travel to the Rose Bowl for UCLA, and then you cap the season with Notre Dame. You don't leave the city of Los Angeles in the entire month of November right now. All 4 of those games are in LA.
And you look at literally the Utah game, UCLA, and the Notre Dame game are their season. You could finish 9. I mean, if you go 9-3 and you lose those 3 games, all right, you know what? At least you have accomplished something. But I think this team is if they're worse than 10-2, that's where you fail. That's where I said, like, the expectation is so high. Him going 10-2 with this roster in a very subpar Pac-12 puts the X solely on. Now, Utah is going to be going through rebuild. They've lost a lot of players, but that team is still the core there in Kyle Whittingham in Salt Lake. They're going to come at you and they're going to punch you in the mouth. Arizona might be interesting. They did have a top 25 recruiting class. They do have a whole depth of roster they have to rebuild. I think they're better than Arizona State right now because Arizona State's lost 28 players to the transfer portal. I don't know what's going on there. Herm Edwards has lost that entire team. But either way, both those teams in Arizona are not very elite yet in the Pac-12. Colorado's not a very good football team. Cal's not what they used to be. There's no Aaron Rodgers or Marshawn Lynch or Deshaun Jackson walking through that door. Stanford Cardinal, David Shaw, one of the greatest football coaches in the country, but he does what he has to do at Stanford. It's a very similar to a Northwestern situation or a Vanderbilt or a Duke or Notre Dame. You have the academic standards. You've got to coach to that. But they always find a way to somehow get an upset. If you're Lincoln Riley, you've got to get your team focused and be able to play from day one, work the guys through. I think having the familiarity of Williams at receiver and Williams at receiver and Williams at quarterback is going to help his offense gel. And as we've all heard, if you probably read stories, Jordan Addison, Blitnikoff Award winner, wide receiver at Pitt, is now in the transfer portal. There are potential reasons that he might have been enticed by a certain coach that we've been talking about for the past 5 minutes to get him to leave Pitt and go to the transfer portal. If Addison leaves and transfers to USC, that gives you two really good receivers with a very good quarterback in a receiver offense that's here to benefit you. Could put them in a position to really succeed and really blow up on the national scale. We don't know what Notre Dame's going to be like at the very end of the year, and UCLA we don't know what they're going to be like. So those games might actually be more winnable. And if they were earlier in the year, I'd be a little more worried. But it does give him that time of that team and that offense to really gel and move forward. They're going to recruit athletes. They only had 8 players they signed on National Signing Day. 8 freshmen. The majority of this team are all coming out of transfers or whoever they had. And he said they're not done in the transfer portal. But last year, the number 1 overall player, Corey Freeman, was the number 1 recruit, went to USC, struggled last year. They're trying to put him in a new spot. See what that defense really does for USC. You're going to have athletes. You've got to get those guys to play at a high level. And if you looked at the Oklahoma teams, same kind of defense. If my own offense is going to score me 40 points, my defense just has to make sure I only give up 35. So you don't have to be elite. You just got to be good enough to get off the field and let your offense score.
We got to see how USC puts this whole thing together. I know you say that there's sky high expectations out there at USC, but that should be expected. That should be expected. Yeah. And that's the thing where USC fans have got to really get into it. The same thing I think I said to you years ago about Georgia. And I always said, are you just happy being a good football team? Are you willing to be 9-3, 10-2, or you need to raise your expectations. You need to raise you should be competing at the time for a BCS national title. But, at this point now, Georgia's expectations are the playoffs. Every single year, it's playoffs or bust. And you can always say that SEC championship is a playing game. Same thing with a school like Ohio State. Same thing that we demand. We demand that you need to be competing for the playoffs. Same for a school like Clemson. Clemson, 2 national titles in this playoff. Here you're looking at them and saying, you missed the playoffs. Last year was a terrible year for Clemson. And they go 9-3?
9-3, yeah.
And that's a terrible year for Clemson. USC should be demanding more of their program. It's the same thing with the next program that we're going to go to. But
before we jump there, it's not just USC. I think it's the entire Pac-12. They've got to reinvent their own identity on the national scale. Do you know who there's only 2 teams from the Pac-12 that have made the playoff, and the last time those 2 teams are Oregon and Washington. What was the last team and what was the last year that one of those 2 schools made the playoff?
It would be 2016 Washington.
Yeah, I mean, it's 20. We're going into the 2022 season, and they haven't seen a Pac-12 team in that high-profile Final Four in six or seven seasons. You're losing the identity, and that entire platform and that entire geographic imprint and footprint is gone. That's why the league wants USC and UCLA to be good, because if they get them back on there and they get them in the playoff, it gives that entire region more spotlight and puts their conference on the map. If not, they just continue to be the conference of champions for track and field, swimming and diving, and water polo.
Let's go over to where Lincoln Riley left. Let's go to Oklahoma. And let's talk Sooners here. We got to ask the question, how does Oklahoma recover from having something so massive of losing your head coach and then losing your starting quarterback, someone that you were going to be dependent on, and then bringing in a first time head coach in Brett Venables. All three of those factors go to most schools. That's a huge deal. And that is something that could destroy a program if not handled correctly.
Might be one of the most important seasons in Oklahoma football history. And that's saying something. That program is a very fine program. It's been around, very successful for years. But you're getting what, a year or two away from going to the SEC. You're in a league which, brand wise, you and Texas should be dominating every season. Baylor, TCU, Iowa State, Kansas State, Texas Tech, they should not be challenging for titles. It should be Texas, Oklahoma every year. When you see your head coach leave, both your quarterbacks, Spencer Rattler also left, so you lost your top two quarterbacks in your depth chart. You see recruits coming in for 2023 class and the 2022 class, the one you signed, all decommit really close to signing day and either sign somewhere else, or the 2023 guys then commit to USC. You go from a offensive focused offense under Lincoln Riley to, I think, more of a back to the Bob Stoops kind of era where it's going to be defense, run the football, and play a little more old school type. Get a little tougher, I think. That defense needs to get tougher across the board. I think that's why they wanted Brent Venables to come in. And also try to use some of that Clemson like recruiting and thought process to help get them ready for this next league they're about to jump to. It does fuel the fire. Was Lincoln Riley scared about going to the SEC? And that's why he also bolted. I think when you get paid a lot and you have a chance to be a head coach at USC, those factors probably override the I'm scared to coach in the SEC factor. But it's out there and it's a rumor, so you never know. Oklahoma, they have got to play for the Big 12 title this year to maintain success. If they fall behind, if Matt Campbell can get Iowa State back to that championship game after losing Brees Hall, Kollar, a couple of guys on defense, and Brock Purdy at quarterback who have gotten that program there, if Baylor can continue to maintain their level and take a next step, if their in-state rival Oklahoma State can win, God forbid, back-to-back Big 12s, or place for, they actually didn't win it last year, if they can play for back-to-back Big 12s, if they can win, Bedlam 2 times in a row, then you really are in trouble because your last memories of being in the Big 12 and having Oklahoma State as a rival are now gone because you're leaving after losing to them. You look at Texas. That's the most lucrative athletic department in the entire country. And they didn't have a player drafted. I don't think that streak is going to continue to go. I mean, that program right now, under Steve Sarkisian, after getting Quinn Ewers back there, Bijan Robinson at running back, they are going to be on the upward trend this year and making their way. They have a lot more positive energy in that football program than Oklahoma does. Oklahoma, we don't know who their quarterback is. They lost, their running back. They lost a couple of receivers. They lost some players on defense. They don't have an identity outside of Brett Venables coming back where he was a defense coordinator years ago, almost 2 decades. It's a weird transition period for Oklahoma. It kind of reminds me of right before Bob Stoops came in and took a year or two to struggle, and then had Josh Heupel, was not the greatest college quarterback, but he managed the offense well, and the defense played fantastic, and they won games close, won games ugly, and then won a national championship. I don't know if Oklahoma has that luck, that firepower right off to get that done. And the way the game has changed so much since then, I don't think it's going to be plausible. But they have got to know the opportunities are slipping away. And if you look what's going on down, even a former Big 12 rival in Texas A&M, all of that NIL stuff they have there and all the oil money they're putting into players, they have number one recruiting class in the country. You're going against them. You're going against Alabama. Ole Miss has put together some stuff. LSU is always going to recruit highly. You got Arkansas as a natural rival for Oklahoma from way back in the olden days. This is only going to get bigger for them, and you're not going to have the cupcakes of Kansas and Kansas State and Iowa State to get 3, 4, 5, 6 conference wins and sort of build up there and get to the title game. You're going to have to go through a slugfest, so you've got to maximize this year, and it's to really, use a pun, circle the wagons moment for the Sooners, and hopefully Boomer and Sooner don't knock the wagon over and you fall down, because this could be a real big tipping point for that entire athletic department. They need to really, band together and focus on 2022 and beyond, because They could fall into a quandary of an 8-win season would be a great year for them.
I think that one of the best things to soften the blow for the Sooners is the transfer of Dylan Gabriel. I think Dylan Gabriel, coming from UCF, was injured last year, didn't play a full year. I think people don't remember how good he was for the Knights down there in Orlando. The dude has 70 touchdowns to 14 interceptions on his career. He's going to come in, I believe, as a redshirt junior. I think he took him, or maybe a gray shirt last year. I'm not 100% sure what his eligibility status is. The only thing that really is concerning to me is he's taken over about 50 sacks in his career. So he winds up getting hit, which, if you look at last year not finishing the full year out for him, playing at UCF, you may be playing 1, 2 ranked teams a year. And you take a look at Oklahoma's schedule. And again, I think this is kind of where I go every single year. UTEP and Kent State to lead off the season. Both of those are in Norman. Those are both wins. Coming off of an injury, getting himself more comfortable, getting that rust knocked off, getting, that level of confidence back. To Lincoln, Nebraska. It's a do or die for Scott Frost year. Like, again, we're going to go back this season. We're going to be on the Scott Frost fire watch here. Because if he has another year like last year, not going to last. And then you start into Big 12 play. You go Kansas in October 8th.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, of that schedule though, I think that trip to Lincoln is going to be tough. I think Nebraska has nothing to lose. That team is going to be very desperate. So that's actually going to be a real big test for Brett Venables because you also have Casey Thompson, the former Texas quarterback, transferred up to Nebraska. It's going to be really interesting to see how they balance that out. And that actually might be a very good team bonding kind of road win. And I say that those young teams where there's a lot of turmoil. You had that one road trip. Home games are one thing. Your fans are there. It's the home thing. You sleep in your own bed, you at the dorm or wherever, the apartment. But you make that road trip to a hostile environment where it's just you guys. And sometimes the band doesn't even fully, you don't have the full band traveling. Obviously, you're in 100,000 people there, all cheering against you. If you can come in there and rally and get a win, it kind of gets the team going and sort of they figure out they can trust each other. That right there might be one of the biggest games in Brett Venables' early coaching career, is just going into Lincoln versus a team and a coach who are desperate and are on the fire watch list. We've got to rally together. We've got to go in and get this W. And if they do that, that takes them into the Big 12 play with a huge big W, a road win over a Big 10 school, and puts a nice feather in their cap.
The last 5 games of the season for Oklahoma. And they have a 4-game stretch that could be very tricky. I don't want to say tough, but I want to say tricky. You travel to Ames, Iowa, to play the Cyclones right out of your bye. You go home to play a very much improved Baylor team, and Baylor I expect to be better and better this year. Then you have to go to Morgantown to face the Mountaineers. No matter what, that's going to be a tough one. Oklahoma State comes to Norman, so I do like the fact that the Sooners get the Cowboys at home. And then you finish your season with the Red Raiders. I'm not too worried about that one. But that Iowa State to Oklahoma State kind of stretch right there, that's going to tell us who Oklahoma is. Like, that piece right there is going to say, this is who the Sooner team is. This is what Brett Venables needs to do to get better.
Yeah, I mean, Oklahoma. I think they kept the recruiting class together this past year, but I think this spring practice was more of a identity of who we're going to be. We're going to change our philosophy. They're going to run the football. They're going to be tough. And they're going to play defense. They're going to be much better at defense. If you watch anything from Clemson over the past 10 years during their real nice run, that defense for Clemson, they're nothing to frown upon. Like, those guys are playing hard. They're in position. They're coached well, and they tackle really well. He loves his linebackers, and he puts his corners on islands, and you're going to have to get after it because that's how he runs his defense. If you want to be coached up like that and you want to learn how to play corner on an island, play linebacker, look at all the defensive linemen Clemson put into the draft the past few years. That's the kind of guy he puts in there. Now, will they be able to adjust to the open spread offense of, say, a Texas Tech? which is not the same old Texas Tech of the past, but the Big 12 historically. We're going to put 4 or 5 receivers. We're going to stretch the field to the full 50.5 yards wide. We're going to make you cover every square inch instead of having a little more condensed space. That's going to be a different philosophical change, but I think the identity of being tough is what they have to get back to and not as flashy. Oklahoma flashy versus Oklahoma tough, I would take Oklahoma tough.
Another conference that you just mentioned there, Fresh. Let's go over to the ACC. Let's talk there. Like we had Kenny Pickett lighting up the scoreboards in Pitt. Does Clemson just have, we had the one down year and now they're back? Or is it a year where we can see, NC State takes that next step and really makes this a two-team race? Or is this a team like Miami who finally decides to wake up and actually really compete in this conference?
Well, I think first off, we're going to address the Clemson question. They've had a lot of players get drafted. They've still recruited at a high level, but I don't know if I'm not sold on DJ at the quarterback spot. You lose your 2 coordinators, Venables to Oklahoma and Tony Ellett to conference rival Virginia. So that experience that's been with Dabo Swinney for so long is now gone. Yeah, you have you have 2 assistants you promoted within, but that continuity in that staff is going to hurt. You've lost your veteran linebackers who were 6th-year seniors. The 2 guys who have been banged around, plays for national championships. You've lost them. Justin Ross, who had a rough year, still trying to recover from injury from a couple of seasons ago, he finally left. You don't really have the stars coming back. It's kind of like a team without a face. I think the rest of the league also has gotten better. I don't think Clemson truly rebounds. I think they're past their window. They don't have that elite quarterback. They don't have the Deshaun Watson to Trevor Lawrence pass off, which made them carry. I think this is going to be, there's a reason why Dabo didn't leave, because he probably felt I can maintain an image. I've earned, equity here. If I go somewhere else in 3 years, I might get fired. I've earned a couple national championships. I've built myself here. I'm okay. The quarterback situation, though, when you mentioned Kenny Pickett, Leary at NC State is going to be is a high. I think he's going to be a great quarterback. I think he's actually the best quarterback in the league. You have Armstrong at Virginia. You have Hartman coming back at Wake Forest. Those 3 quarterbacks plus Van Dyke down at Miami make this league very exciting. I think you're going to see a lot of points, and that's going to be another reason why he's an afterthought. You have 4 quarterbacks there, and NC State is a very good football team. Yeah, they lost Iggy, the tackle, in the draft, but the rest of the team really comes back pretty intact. There's not many guys who left. Wake Forest, you lost your number 2 over receiver. You lost your starting running back. One went to the draft, one transferred out. Hartman's coming back there with an offense. I think they'll be able to score points. The defense still is a question at Wake Forest. They've got to get a lot better to get that team balanced. North Carolina, I think they've had a top 10 recruiting class. I don't think they're ready. Sam Howell was the only guy on that team. They're going to struggle. Miami's interesting. Mario Cristobal comes down there. Van Dyke took over when Derrick King got hurt, and he actually got the team playing well, upset NC State, and actually caused them to not play for a ACC title. I think Miami is the real key. The money they're putting in there, that after when Cristobal came over, he said, I want X, Y, and Z. They've invested it. They recruited a top 25 class. They already had talent there from previous, and they brought in a couple extra transfers there. This year is going to be the beginning of a return, I think, for Miami. I don't think Florida State's returning anytime soon. Norvell has that entire program in dysfunction. There's not the fear of Florida State as there was, but I think Miami is going to get some of that swagger back with Cristobal being the right hire. Norvell is not the right hire at Florida State. Cristobal is the right hire at Miami. He's going to get them going, and they're going to be a major player in the way this season plays out. Boston College, I think they're just an okay football team. They have a good quarterback. I think that's all I really got there. Syracuse is nothing. Duke has a new coach. They're going to be nothing. Pitt is going to struggle now with not having Pickett and then Addison transferring. That's a big, big blow to them. But I think it comes down to Miami is going to take advantage of this, and they're going to run, and they're going to cause some trouble. There's no reason why they should not win their side of the ACC and get to the title game and face the winner of that Wake Forest NC State game will play Miami for the title.
Prepping for this episode here, Fresh, and we started talking about, who's going to be the team that takes over the ACC? Is it going to be the continuation of NC State? Is this going to be the year that Dabo gets Clemson back to where they were supposed to be? Miami makes the change, goes to Cristobal. I think Cristobal is a pretty darn good football coach there. He's home. He's excited to be home. I think that they have, while you kind of didn't call it. Tyler Van Dyke, I personally believe he's the best quarterback in the ACC. It's him or the kid. I can never say his name. His first name's Phil. Over there at Boston College.
Djokovic.
Yeah, I think Van Dyke though. It's him and Van Dyke arguing 1 and 2 in the ACC there as well. You take a look at Van Dyke. What did he do last year when Miami? Miami played Michigan State tough, but wound up losing that one late down there in Coral Gables. But again, look at Van Dyke's stats from last year: 25 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, had a completion rating of 62%. You bring back sophomore Jalen Knighton, running back there. He wound up with just under 600 yards and 8 touchdowns, but he's only a freshman. Miami's bringing in I believe they had like the 14th or 15th rated recruiting class. Wound up having 6 guys being early enrollees down there in Coral Gables. I like I really do. And then you take a look at their schedule. It sets up really interesting. I only have 3 losses on their schedule, like for sure to me. They have to go to College Station in week 3. And everything I'm looking at here, and this is the second time I've noticed this because I've been going through a lot of team schedule. Week 3 in the college football season is going to be a banner week. The next game I see is traveling on the 15th of October to Blacksburg, Virginia. Playing the Hokies there, not an easy place no matter who you are. We've talked about what an advantage it is for Virginia Tech. That's a huge home field advantage. And then I have them, they have to travel to Clemson, play in Death Valley at the very end of the season, the weekend before Thanksgiving. All 3 of those games I have penciled in as losses. Winning one of those 3 games, and all you got to do is win one of them. You're looking at sitting at 10-2. You're looking at probably a New Year's Day 6 game.
Yeah, I mean Miami's a brand in itself. Let's just think, if Miami starts winning and they get one of those, 8 o'clock kickoffs on ESPN or ABC, you're going to see all the alums on the sideline. All they do is just throwing up the U 24/7, and that right there, that's free recruiting. You're going to see Warren Sapp back on campus or Ed Reed. The list. Michael Irvin's going to be throwing up on NFL Game Day morning. All these guys are going to help promote Miami, and if you're a recruit, you're like, all right, that's how it is. And then you're going to go on ESPN, you're going to look at the 30 for 30, and you see the U, and then the U part 2, and you're going to start seeing that swagger that they had. And that's what Mario wants. He recruited at Alabama, he's recruited at Oregon. Now he's taking it to Miami, where he has, I think, truly fully invested because he played there. And one other thing I noticed, you mentioned the top 15 recruiting class, they had the 8th best transfer class. And of those transfers, they got 11 guys. 6 of those guys were offensive and defensive linemen, and they got one edge, basically outside linebacker, edge guy. He could play, put his hand in the dirt if he had to. His investment was on the line of scrimmage. So if you can build depth on the offensive and defensive line, that is how you're going to really dictate the pace of that football game and be able to dominate late in the game by wearing down the opponent one way or the other. And if he knows he can take care of the line of scrimmage and own it, and have the depth there to withstand an injury or 2 that might come along the way, that will propel them to even bigger success.
Over to the SEC here. And question coming out of the SEC.
I think first off, we'll start at A&M. You come in the number 1 recruiting class in the country. Arguably, I think, according to some sources, might be the 3rd or best recruiting class by points totals ever. And they've loaded up with a bunch of kids. You beat Alabama last year. You're the first time that about a Saban assistant has beaten Nick Saban. You've crossed that off the list. But all you've really been is a 2 or 3 loss team. Yeah, you played North Carolina in the Orange Bowl in 2020, where getting to New Year's Six with teams playing 8 games and 6 games and whatever, I'm throwing that out the window. Your quarterback, Calzada, he transfers to Auburn. You go bring in a quarterback, Johnson, from LSU. You have some other guys in that roster. Are you even truly set on your quarterback? I mean, that's the first thing. Jimbo, who's your quarterback? You have all these linemen, all these players all over the place. You lose Isaiah Spiller, who was your best running back to the draft. Where do you actually go? Are all these freshmen that you brought in this top class and all the guys you brought in last year, are they really truly ready to play? Are you just living on expectations? Are you living on the glory of, I won in February, I won in December, but when the fall comes around, what is my team actually going to do? this actually, for I think the third year in a row, people have had high expectations for Texas A&M and Jimbo. And also remember, he got paid a lot of money, just like Lincoln Riley's getting paid a lot of money at USC. Jimbo's getting paid a lot of money at Texas A&M, and he got an extension, I think, because people came trying to get him to go somewhere else this past offseason. You've got to get those players now to perform. Your schedule, you're still going to play the SEC West. That's going to happen. You got the Arkansas is an up and coming team, Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin. You never know what the Pirates going to have there at Starkville. You got Alabama, Auburn. I think you're terrible, so you're going to have a rough year under Brian Harsin. There's a lot of turmoil there. The expectation for you is to get to Atlanta and play for an SEC championship. You haven't done it, and if you don't do it this year, the recruiting can only get you so far if the players aren't performing. And with the money they've invested there and the players they've gone out and they've given you everything they want facility wise, you might get some boosters a little, leery. I'm not sure that the offense that Jimbo Fisher is known for is really truly ready to compete at a high level. You get one win, but then you lose mindless games somewhere else. Do you have the mental strength to carry yourself to an undefeated or 11-1 year? I'm not sold on A&M until they do it. I think that's where I'm coming from that perspective. The team there's so much talent there, but can they all put it together? Can they actually play as a team and not just a bunch of fancy kids who, look, let's be serious with NIL. They're all getting some serious cash with a bunch of oil money down there. And there's a lot of controversy out in the SEC and even the nation that these players are being paid a lot more, even though it's legal and things can happen. Are the kids, they're not going to play anymore. They've got all the money in their bank account. What's the point of competing?
To me, I'm looking at right now, and maybe I'm wrong, but in the middle of May, when we're recording this team screams giant, giant letdown. Everyone's on that hype train. Everyone's buying in. All of these great freshmen. He's going to need a year to give them, let him be a defensive rotation guy. Let him get some snaps on the offensive line. Let them, work their ways into this program. Yeah, you might have one or two freshman starters out there, maybe three, but looking at their schedule, I don't like how it sets up for them. And again, I go to this the week 3 game against Miami. I know that it's at home. If for some reason A&M on paper should win that game, A&M should. You play Arkansas in Dallas at the stadium,
And you lost last year to them.
and then you go to Tuscaloosa. You come out of that, you got to go to Columbia, South Carolina. Then again, you look at this, you wind up having Ole Miss, Florida. Again, I'm with you. Auburn, and then you have your USC, UMass Minutemen. You recruited very, very well. And again, I might be wrong on this. I might be dead wrong on this. Like, they won the offseason, and we are offseason champions. I am I am much higher on the potential of Tennessee. Last year, I told you leaving the season, I was really, really high on Tennessee. Coming back, Hendon Hooker, he is a sleeper candidate for that Heisman Trophy. If he there and balls out in the SEC East, and looking at how it's set up, he has some opportunities to have some marquee wins. You look at the Gators, Knoxville. That's always going to be a marquee matchup there. You go to Baton Rouge and play LSU. If Heupel versus Kelly, that would be it's a nice little story right there. If let's say Hendon Hooker is the reason they go down to Baton Rouge and upset the Tigers. And then you got Alabama coming up to Knoxville. And then also the same thing with Georgia. You got to go to Athens and play the Dogs. That's a great rivalry. It's one of Georgia's top rivals. If you look at what if he is able to knock off Georgia in Athens? Now, do I think I might yeah, I would put, a paycheck on this stuff? No. But what I'm saying is that a sleeper candidate to catapult yourself into that Heisman Trophy race, you got to pull off one or two of those things right there. And if you do, in a invite to New York. And I tell you this, while we think that the SEC West is absolutely loaded with coaches, like we've named Brian Kelly at LSU, you got Saban in Alabama, you have the Pirate at Mississippi State, you have Jimbo at A&M, you name all, Kiffin at Ole Miss. You name off all of those great coaches that are over there in the West. Mark Stoops has done a real nice job over there at Kentucky, and Smart over there in the East.
Yeah, and you look at Tennessee, where South Carolina, I think, is they're getting back there. I think Beamer's going to do a great job. Billy Napier's been given the keys to everything at Florida. Will they be back in 1 year? Look, I saw Anthony Richardson last year. He's going to have to make a major jump to be competitive year two. We heard all the talk about Emory Jones during the offseason last year in Gainesville, and he was terrible. So until I actually see what they do at Florida, that's one thing. But I think over time, Napier will get Florida back to where they have to be. Mark Stoops at Kentucky has built one of the most consistent programs in the league. They go up 2 years and they drop down a year, or they get right back up. They don't fall too far, and they've maintained. They've been competitive. I mean, losing Wandell Robinson and 2 offensive linemen in the draft, and losing Josh Pascal might be a little tough for them to fully digest this year, even though they have Will Levis at quarterback. But I think they'll always be competitive and they'll play. Missouri, who knows what they're going to get at Missouri and Drinkowitz. Vanderbilt is Vanderbilt, but Tennessee, if they don't take advantage of it this window right now, the competition in the East is only going to get better, because you saw what South Carolina and Florida freaked out because of the way Georgia just won a national championship, and those 2 schools got passed, and they're kind of getting a little antsy. So they're throwing at it. Tennessee's doing the same thing with Heupel. The arms race is picking up, and if Hooker and that Tennessee Volunteer team don't really get it done now, that becomes a recruiting thing of like, hey, it's just Tennessee. They're an 8-win, 9-win team. They're not really going anywhere. Heupel isn't a great coach. He had 3 years. They've already, kind of struggled. You don't want to get caught in that. Well, he's just another guy. Tennessee has to strike this year, and they have to do it impressively. They have a very tough schedule, which actually gives them more national eyes on it. A trip to LSU is nothing to bat an eye on. That's going to get national attention. The third Saturday in October when they play Bama, that's going to get attention. The Georgia game between the hedges, that's going to get attention. They're going to have people watching that program, and they're going to have to get it done. We've heard in the past, when Lane Kiffin was there, and when Dooley was there, and the other guy who let him, the other head coach there, so who was after Dooley but before Heupel. You get these guys in there, they get the hype trade going for Tennessee, and then they fall flat on their face. Will Tennessee actually break through that glass and get going? They've really kind of trudged through the mud for a while, and they always get to that expectation and they collapse. Hooker is the great quarterback. He has the offense that fits him. Can these receivers get better? Can they take the next step? Can the defense take the next step and really help become a full-on program? They have the fan base. If you've been to Neyland Stadium on a Saturday evening, Saturday night, or afternoon, that place is rocking. The fans are ready to go. Now the team has to be consistent and show up. They played maybe a half versus Georgia and maybe a half versus Alabama last year, but they couldn't play the full 4 quarters. What will we see Tennessee play a full 4-quarter game and be competitive and get some of those wins instead of get some of those losses? The only thing is they're not sneaking up on people this year. Everyone talked about how they're ready. They're going to take Georgia. They're going to give Georgia the best competition, and they gave them a pretty good game, for middle of the 3rd quarter, and then it was over. But now everyone knows Tennessee. The target's there. Like there's no, hey, they're going to creep up on you. They're not going to take it for granted. Tennessee has their 1 year there. They're ready to go, and they're ready to make the next step. Now you have the expectation on your back that you have to be able to meet. I think they do a better job of meeting expectations than A&M will. I think Tennessee will give Georgia a scare, but I think the schedule of playing Alabama and having to go down to Baton Rouge and having the Florida game, which is always tough, that mindset of always losing to Florida is in the back of their minds, even though those players haven't been there for a long time. That still hangs with the program. That Georgia-Tennessee game will decide the East. This will be like they could go to Atlanta. I don't think they will, but Georgia's going through kind of a reload as well. Who knows what that defense is going to be like by the time those 2 teams play. That late game in November will be interesting, but the Volunteers are going to be in the conversation throughout the season.
10 now. Take a look at who's going to be that team that sneaks up.
Look at the Big Ten. 2 years ago it was Indiana that came out of nowhere. Last year was Michigan State. They made that big pump. I thought about this long and hard. I'm going to be bold, and I'm going to say Nebraska. I think Nebraska, with the desperation factor that plays in, knowing that everything is on their shoulders to win. The Big Ten West is no real hard struggle. Minnesota, they've lost a lot of guys to the draft recently. Don't know what they're going to get from there. Wisconsin has to replace 8 starters on defense. They have a quarterback that's less than subpar. Braylon Allen's the only guy there, and they lost a couple offensive linemen in the draft, and they have no real receivers. I don't trust the Badgers. Northwestern, Pat Fitzgerald, you never know what you can get there. Illinois, Brett Bielema's team, not sure that they're a major contender. They might get a couple wins, but they're not loaded. Iowa, Kirk Ferentz, that football team, they always have a good year, and then a bad year, and then a good year, and then a bad year. I think they're on the downward trend this season. I think they're a couple years away from getting back there. That leaves the door wide open for Nebraska. You bring in Casey Thompson. You no longer have Adrian Martinez for the 25th year senior at quarterback. Thompson played for Texas. He's mobile. He kind of fits that Scott Frost system. You added 12 players in the transfer portal. You had the 33rd overall recruiting class. Like we mentioned earlier, that Oklahoma game on September 17th, that place is going to be rocking in Lincoln. They almost got them last year in Norman. They should have won that game if it wasn't for some crazy stuff. That game is on their radar. And if they somehow beat Oklahoma, which is very, very viable, that gives them a springboard for the rest of the season. You have a trip to Michigan on November 12th, and you have at Iowa on Thanksgiving weekend. Both those in late November. They could have 9 or 10 wins in that, 8-9 wins by then by the time they make those 2 trips. You host Minnesota, you host Wisconsin, you host Illinois, and you host Indiana. All 3 of the 4 teams in your own side of the division you have coming to your place. Especially the Minnesota and Wisconsin games. Those are big environments so that your crowd sort of pack on and give you the extra boost. I could see this team winning 9-10 games if things bounce right way. So they get, especially if you get that upset win over Oklahoma, this team could really surge and make a big splash and save Scott Frost's job and maybe even save the program. Because if they suck this year and they stumble, he's getting fired. And if the godson, Heisman Trophy winning quarterback from your own school can't win, that's a big stink on the entire program's history going forward. That's easy to recruit against, and that just shows that Nebraska, this is not the 80s and the 70s. This is not Tom Osborne's Nebraska. This program is dead, and they're only name and name only if they don't win this year.
Out of all of our questions that we were texting back and forth about preparing for this episode, I had to do a lot of thinking about what team I thought was going to be the surprise story of the Big Ten this year. And Wisconsin, but would Wisconsin really be a surprise? They've made it to the Big Ten title game. And then for a second, I thought about Purdue. And Aiden O'Connell is back there at quarterback, and Purdue looked good at times. And there is still some talent on that team over there. Tanner Morgan's back at quarterback this year. He's 17th year redshirt quadruple senior or something like that.
He's actually teaching classes this year, I think.
If you go back to week 1 last year against Ohio State, and I know Ohio State's defense last year, I was extremely critical of them. I'm not going to say he was carving up the Georgia defense or even the Iowa defense, but he was slicing up Ohio State's defense. And he was going down, and Ohio State didn't pull away in that game until he went down with that injury. If he's recovering from that injury this year, if he goes back to any little bit of a talent that he was last year or the year before that, I really think that Minnesota could be the surprise team. If you take a look at their schedule for this year, they start with 3 very easily winnable games. You got New Mexico State, Western Illinois, and Colorado. All of those games are in Minneapolis. Then you're going to have your first real test, Michigan State. Now, Michigan State, I don't know yet about the Spartans. That's going to be a tough one. But I really like that matchup right there. If Minnesota's ranked, let's say Minnesota loses to Michigan State but beats Purdue, or whichever way we want to go, and you're going into Beaver Stadium at 5-1, Minnesota's going to make some noise there. That Penn State, and then you go Rutgers. You do have to travel to Nebraska, so that's the kind of tough thing about Minnesota. That's the only reason why I can't be like, oh man, I'm super excited about Minnesota, is that they have to travel to East Lansing, Happy Valley, Lincoln. Makes it really tough for them to really win. If you can pull off those 4 games, I think Minnesota is looking at a pretty darn good year.
Well, I'll tell you right now, I'm going to take this forum to publicly apologize to PJ Fleck and row the boat. Honestly, I thought his first year was like a 1 year wonder. He jumped into a great situation, and that team was just gonna, and program was gonna implode. Whatever he did at Western Michigan was not gonna carry over to Minnesota. I'm sorry, I was wrong. His coaching last year might have been the best coaching in the entire country. Because you said they're on their fourth or fifth string running back, and that offense is running back centric to the extreme. Tanner Morgan's not throwing for 4,000 yards. He is managing it very similar to the Shanahan type offense where the running backs, the motion, and using the offensive lineman to dictate that line of scrimmage and move the football. That's their philosophy, and then manage the clock. You lose Abraham that first game. You lose a couple other guys. You get down to your fourth and fifth straight running back. Morgan already dealing with some personal off the field issues going into that season. I think you have to keep that mindset going of keeping him focused. Don't letting him guide the team, but also dealing with the pressure of what happened in his life, and then keeping that team ready to go and play the Iowas, the Wisconsins, the Nebraskas of the world, and stay competitive and get 9 wins. They really didn't have the glaring superstars on that roster, but they banded together and they played well, and they've put together a philosophy there at Minnesota of who they are, an identity like. I'm not going to compare PJ Fleck to Barry Alvarez, but it seems a very similar staple on a program where this is who we are, this is the way we're going to be. I don't care what happens over the next 10 years. We are going to build offensive line, we are going to run the football, and we're going to play feisty defense. And that's what they've done ever since he's arrived, and it's worked, and it's competitive, and players buy into that. And the intensity at practice, the intensity and the joy, the energy he brings out on game day fuel that team. So I could see the energy factor he brings and the way he has that team playing with each other. You go to those road games, you make that trip down to the Beaver Stadium. That's the road games are what bring teams together, and that energy and that camaraderie that Minnesota has gives them the strength to go into Beaver Stadium and play with Penn State and other teams when they make those road trips.
Last question in our 6 pack here, so we finish off the night. Debated what this sixth question was because we went to the 5 major conferences, but I'm gonna call a slight audible here, and I'm gonna 5. Outside the top 5 major conferences could be this team that is Cincinnati this year that they wind up breaking into the playoff.
Great question. Yeah, well, I don't think it's gonna be Cincinnati making a repeat because that team lost too many players, obviously. Looking at the landscape, I'm going to stick with the same conference. I'm going to look at the AAC, the American Athletic Conference, which both these teams are actually going to be, I think, fighting for that title, and that's Houston and UCF. What Gas Malzahn has done and what Dana Holgerson's done at Houston, they've got themselves on that platform. I think both those teams are going to be ranked at the end of the season, and I just have a weird feeling that UCF is going to win the AAC, and with one loss or potentially undefeated, I think Gus Malzahn it's a weird, I can't really explain it, but I think Gus Malzahn gets UCF to that point where they finish maybe one loss, maybe undefeated, and really have them put themselves in the argument for a playoff spot, but definitely a New Year's Six bowl. So bounce house down there, I think he's going to have them revive. I think that win over Florida in the bowl game got them a huge lift in recruiting. They've got a bunch of transfers. That 5-star linebacker from Maryland, I think he transferred down there to UCF. They're getting players, and the school's already done it. They've already sold themselves. I think UCF gets it done, and they put themselves in a New Year's Six bowl at the end of the year, and they win the AAC. One loss maybe, but definitely a very good year for Gus Malzahn to really make a statement there in the state of Florida.
If Boise State can win week 1 versus Oregon State at Oregon State, they're going to run the table. I mean, outside of a matchup in Boise against BYU, That would be the only other real game. I also see, yeah, you got San Diego State, who should be okay. Fresno State should be okay. But there's no one on that schedule that really scares me for Boise State. I think Boise State, though, would run into the UCF problem. Who'd you play? Like last year, we forget that Notre Dame or Cincinnati winds up winning. They beat Purdue. They wound up beating Notre Dame in South Bend. Those were both two really, really nice wins for them that they're able to tip their hat on. You also look at what they did against Houston and what they did against SMU as well. The team that has the perfect schedule, and I mean the perfect schedule, that if you could pull off, if you could have a miracle run, and again, this is a miracle run, so let me be very clear on that one. Again, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but they have the perfect schedule for this to be set up for, is the BYU Cougars. If BYU, now just hang tight with me here, BYU, week 2, you get the Baylor Bears in Utah. You pull that upset. The following week, you have to travel to Eugene. And if you were able to knock off the Oregon Ducks, that would be two huge and two teams that will be ranked in the top 25 to start the season. And then this is another great one. And see, this is where there's a little bit of an advantage there. Saturday, October 8th, in beautiful Las Vegas, Nevada, they have to play the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. And then a week later, coming to Utah, is the Arkansas Razorbacks. So you look at that team, and then you also you have to travel to Stanford, and you have to travel to Boise, who I just said Boise could be that team. But you want to talk about a team that has everything in front of you, and you don't, outside of that trip to Eugene, Oregon, all of those games are, I mean, they're not, I don't want to say winnable games, but you'll have a puncher's chance in them. Are we going to be shocked if BYU pulls off the upset in any of those games? No. I'm not saying that BYU is going to be this powerhouse here, but I'm saying this is a team that, if they wind up winning some football games, especially some of those early games, you look at that Baylor game, that Oregon game,